Okay. My research is on relationships, but that's not how I started. I got my bachelor's and master's in computer science. Has anybody taken courses during your bachelor's that you were like, this sucks? Like a class, right? Think that was your entire career now. Like, me, this sucks was for like 5 years of my life. And then I got a chance to study relationships and I just dove right into it. And one of the things with PhDs is that we get hyper focused in that one thing nobody cares about. So I got deep dived focused into relationships, and not just relationships, the initiating part of a relationship. So think about any relationship you have in your life, it's gone through these phases. So you've started a relationship, then you maintain a relationship, and if that person is pissing you off, you just say, bye Felicia, get out of here. And it does not just work from this way to that way, it can go back from this way to that way as well. You've had friends who have rebounded with their exes, they have gone back. So this relationship model can be cyclical in that process. So I got really, really interested in the coming together part of relationships. Thank you so much for being here. And, and I got hyper focused into initiating relationships. So my first ever research project was on how are we becoming friends with each other. And I started the talk with that quote. That is, how do you make friends? Anybody has used this hashtag no new friends? How many people have felt that as we grow older, it's just impossible to make friends, right? Like, how the hell do we make friends? I would just sit at home with my Chardonnay, watch Netflix, and not engage in small talk. Like, please, that's my life. Now, there are more hopeful people in the room than that. For example, Jack. So I'll take your example. Jack, you said that your girlfriend is coming to visit you. Okay. All right. So can I ask some questions about her? Good. All right. So when did you meet her?
My sophomore year of high school, her junior year of high school. So that was like 5 years ago.
So sophomore, I'm still wrapping my head around. So junior is one level higher.
Right.
You went for the senior. All righty. Good, Jack. All right. Okay. Good for you, Jack. All right. So tell me how you became, because, like, every good relationship, before becoming partners, you have to be good friends, right? So I'm thinking, what's her name? Taylor. So you became friends with Taylor? Can you take us through that journey? Like, how was Taylor a stranger and then you looked at her across the room?
Sure.
And how did that happen?
Yeah, we actually had one of our mutual friends
Yeah.
introduce us. So
Okay.
it's pretty funny. We just had a lot of connections that we didn't realize, a lot of mutual friends. And finally, this one friend introduced us and our paths crossed. And we just kind of hung out for a few months as friends. And then,
Is the mutual friend's name Tinder? No.
no, it's
That's the
not.
cover story everybody uses, right? Met from mutual friend. All right, but not Tinder. Okay, good. So you had common friends and then you hung out, and was getting to know her a part of you getting to like her,
Absolutely.
right? What do you like about her?
Well, I mean, the first thing was that she was actually pretty interested in sports, which is big with me, just because
Yeah.
we have similar interests with that. But in general, she's just very easygoing and not very high maintenance, which I loved. And she's always open for like new adventures and going out, like even something as small as going to the park and just walking around for a day or going to the beach or something like that. So I love that.
I like Taylor too. That's great. All right. So now Taylor and Jack, when they became friends, they went through these things, right? So first we have to do what you call reciprocal self-disclosures. You tell me something about me, I will tell you something about me. And based on the type of self-disclosures, we keep building on that, right? Together with that, you have things like similarity. If I like you, if you're similar to me, I like you more. Then you have things like trust and vulnerability. Anybody has, like, the way I understand if I've become good friends with you is the level of ugly selfies I can send you, right? So when you're starting to date somebody, you want to show, like, I woke up like this. And then progressively, the makeup goes off, your hair is disheveled. What is that? It's you getting comfortable with your vulnerability with this person. So the more you spend time with them, the more trust you build, the more vulnerability you build. That's the foundation of any healthy relationship. And it starts with self-disclosures, right? Any questions so far? Okay, good. Now, how has social media changed this? So this is the first activity for you. I want you to be engaged. All right. Now, How does social media impact this friendship forming process? So this is a screenshot of my students' Instagram. Yes, I am that creepy professor, not because I'm stalking my students, that too, but we also created a meme page to understand interpersonal communication. It's called COS214 Pace University. You can go and follow. They explain interpersonal communication with the use of memes. Now, how has social media changed this friendship forming process, aka how are we getting to know each other? Has anybody seen this person before? Do you know her? No, right? Okay. But just by looking at this small little snapshot of her Instagram, what can you tell me of her? What is this Instagram profile saying? She likes nature. What else? She has a boyfriend, right? And a pretty smothering one at that. Like, can you see the little tiles over here? That means she's got multiple pictures with her boyfriend. Like, she's a situation. And, and then she's social as well. What else can you tell me about this person? Thank you for everybody who's joining. Thank you, Vasant. All right. What else can you tell me about this person? Yeah, she was in Long Island, and when she went to New York City, I don't know what the hell DCP is, but let's just pretend we know, right? And she loves her dad, possibly, right? And also, what can you tell me looking at this? She follows more than she's being followed. Now, what does that tell you about her? Jack, you're rude. This guy is brutal. Oh my God. Taylor, you need to know. All right. Now, how does social media impact this friendship forming process? Social media gives out, whether you know it or whether we know it or not, consciously or unconsciously, we're giving out a lot of cues where people are making impressions of us, right? We are doing we're doing what you call voluntary self-disclosures. I didn't have to ask this person whether she is in a relationship or not. Have you ever met somebody? Bethany, I met you yesterday, right? How weird would it be if I asked you the first thing out of my mouth is, Bethany, okay, do you have a boyfriend? So weird, right? But then if I stalk you or follow you on Instagram, I already know if you're single, if you're dating, or what have you. So we're getting to know people at an accelerated rate because you are choosing to put this information out there. Now, what does that do to relationships? It leads to accelerated trust and intimacy, and we become this person. It's like, I feel like I know you. So this idea of friendship is changing because of what we are putting out there on social media. Profile before people. So this spiked my interest. This was my first research project, and I said, okay, where else are people getting to know another person through profiles? Where do they get to know another person through profiles? That you're online dating, right? So that's a big, big subject. Now, have you heard stories of online dating back in like 1998, 99, around that? We don't. Only you, Sharon. Now, this next example is not going to be flattering for you if you just said that. Because we always used to think that, oh my God, freak shows go online. Like if you could not get somebody in real life, then you go online. If you get to see the advertisement strategy that is used by Happen, Happn, anybody has heard of Happen over here? Okay. So it's basically two people walking in the park, two beautifully put together people, and they're just walking and then they smile at each other, they don't talk, and then they go to their phones and they see each other's profile and then they start talking. So that's become the new way of us meeting somebody else, that even if you pass me, I want to see your profile first. So online dating has changed completely. Its acceptance has changed. People have thought that this is not a better way, but this is the way to meet people. So this is a research done by Pew Studies. This is back in 2016, so it could be dated. It says online dating has lost much of its stigma, and a majority of Americans now say online dating is a good way to meet people. How many people agree with this? No, Sharon, it's just a hard nut to crack. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, moving on. Now, there's a crap ton of research on online dating, a crap motherloads ton of research. Now, what is all this research? They have one thing in common. They always focus on the user end. That is, how are people making friends? How are they getting to know each other? What kind of deception strategies they use? Anybody has had girlfriends or boyfriends like not boyfriends, but friends who are boys, who have come back and told you, yo, I mean, she looked really hot in her pictures, but when I met her, different situation. And then you hear horror stories from your girlfriends, and then they go on dates, and this guy looked popping and hot on their profile, and they are just like, man, I did not sign up for this. You've heard of that, right? What is that? Because people do tend to lie on their online profiles. And there is a gender disparity. Men lie about some things, women lie about some things. What do you think men lie the most about? Oh my, what a global knowledge. All right, now this is the depths of research that happens because I engage with my students a lot. And I said, okay, how do you know if a guy is lying about his height? They said if a guy says that he is 5'11", he is lying. Because if he was indeed 5'11", he would have rounded it up to 6 feet. So when he's saying he's 5'11", he's actually 5'8". I'm like, whoa, man, where were you with this intel? So, so guys lie about their height and their income if you have to disclose it. What do women lie about? Age and? Age and weight. So if you go to my Bumble profile, I'm 22 and I just weigh like a feather. So, so there's a lot of research on deceptive presentation online, mate preferences. We were talking about what do people get turned off and turned on by when they look at your online profile. And again, I asked my students, what do you get turned off? And majority of my students are females, they're predominantly Caucasian, and they keep talking about this guy holding a fish in their profiles, and we've called him Chad. So Chad holding a fish is a turnoff. Then you have perceived risks, perceived health risks, sexual risks. Just yesterday, there was an article which says an 18-year-old sugar baby went on a dating, on a date or an arrangement with her sugar daddy, and then they drove past a restaurant and he took her home and demanding sex from her. So perceived health risks, sexual risks are a thing in online dating. Then you have predictors of online dating engagement. What happened in your childhood will dictate how much you're going to engage in online dating. That is your attachment style. Then you have first swipe to first date conversations. We nerd out on this shit, I'm sorry. Like, it's just, okay, how do you go from the first swipe to how much do you talk online, and then when do you ask for the phone number? The most common excuse they say is, oh my God, this app is just taking all of the battery of my phone. Do you mind switching to text? Basic thing, the way you get phone numbers. And then from the first conversation, when do you actually meet? Does the time lag between all of this affect the relationship that you're going to have? All of this research is going on, but the main focus, and something that Jess asked me was, tell me if online dating is better than offline dating. That is relationship satisfaction and outcomes. What is better than what? Now this is the thing though. You have all of these cute stories, right? 1/3 of married couples in US meet online, study says. There's now evidence, I mean, it got hidden, but I'm gonna tell you what it said. It says there's evidence that online dating is leading to more diverse marriages, and not just racial diversity, age-wise diversity. For example, Jack, right? He went for the senior. So, and then meeting online leads to happier and more enduring marriages. Now, what else do they say? There are other studies which say 5% of those Americans who are married or in a long-term partnership, and 11% of those who have been together 10 years or less met their partners online. How weird is that? Like, you have all these cute stories of success on online dating, but only 5% are getting married. Then you have the death of the dinner date. I love this. Online daters are too busy or too cheap to eat out when they first meet, so they don't want to engage in that. And then you have these brutal taglines which say, Tinder and the dawn of the dating apocalypse. As romance gets swiped off the screen, some 20-somethings aren't liking what they see. Anybody has heard of like disappointing stories of online dating? Like, this is not working. So there has to be a disjoint, right? Everybody is saying online dating is successful. Some people are saying this, and we are sitting here thinking, I don't really know what to believe anymore, right? I mean, what do I believe? Is this good? Is this bad? What is it? And that kind of triggered my curiosity as well. So in my last year of PhD, I chose to look at these two taglines. It says, 1/3 of married couples in US meet online, and 5% of those Americans who are married in a long-term relationship, yada, yada, have met their partner online. Now, imagine if this room was filled with 100 people, right? And you ask them, okay, raise your hands if you are married. 40 people raise their hands. And then within those 40 people, you say, how many people have met their partners online? A couple of them raised their hands. This is what the researchers took. Said, oh, out of all the people who are married, 1 out of 3 met online, right? But what the hell happened to the rest of the 60 people who did not raise their hands? What about them? They never focused on that. So it was a highly biased study. So what I did was I combined the pool. I said, okay, let's combine people who are in married relationships and who are not in married relationships, but in a relationship anyhow. What does the story tell? And that led to this first publication. It says, is online better than offline for meeting partners? Depends, are you looking to marry or to date? Okay, humble brag situation, this got picked up by a lot of channels. One of them was, the first channel was, bear with me, it was Playboy. So this is me in 2015, like really happy that something so nerdy that I did was picked up by Playboy. And I have to brag it to somebody. So I want to brag it to my mom and dad. But then I have to explain what Playboy is to them, which was just another can, and they're Indian, so they don't know, right? So it was very weird for me, but I was very happy anyway that, okay, online dating is interesting. So what I did was I took this data set that was publicly available of 2,000 odd respondents, and they had people who were dating and in married relationships. And they did a 3-part wave study, that is wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, to look at the attrition of the relationships. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but this was the big takeaway. That is, out of all the people who had met each other online, a majority of them were just still dating or in romantic relationships. They were not getting to that commitment level, right? And when wave 2 and wave 3 showed that out of the people who were dating, 32% had broken up compared to 23% who met their partners offline. So you're getting married less, you're committing less, and you're breaking up more. Now that's the reality of offline dating. Now why is that? Why are we committing less on online dating? Why are we breaking up more? Because of these 2 factors. There are too many options, right? How does that affect you? First of all, you have to sift through all of these people to get that one guy that you're going to date. And imagine, if you may, let's just take another example. So let's say, I'm taking the example of the guy. So let's say you like this girl and then you go out with her. You're on the 3rd date. She keeps her phone, she goes to the restroom, and her phone blinks with a notification and you see a Bumble match. And you're like, whoa, 3rd date and she's still not uninstalled Bumble? What is that, right? Commitment issues, right? Trust issues come up. Where is exclusivity, right? There is no exclusivity because there are so many options. Now, okay, you have that conversation with your to-be girlfriend and then you say, oh, please uninstall the app. She uninstalls the app, things are going great. You have your first fight. And then you ask that question, is this worth it, right? Because you know that if things are not working out with her, you can just go back to Bumble and lo and behold, thousands of women are out there just waiting for your right swipe. It's not like you met them at IBM and you think, okay, how many people can I meet at IBM? Okay, that's not a good example because you have literally 100,000 people working at IBM. But like if you were in a startup and you really meet this cute guy and you're like, okay, what are the chances of me meeting another person? So you think about demand and supply and you try to make things work. But if you're meeting your partner online, you know that a lot of people are just waiting for that next swipe. So there's a lack of exclusivity, lack of commitment, and easy rebound, right? And in online dating, however you like the same movies, the same music, it's not enough. What Jack said was, between her and Taylor, you had a lot of friends, right? You have mutual friends. They could tell you, okay, what kind of person Taylor is. You can do activities together. Well, guess what? In online dating, the entire onus is on you to create that trust, to create that common ground between you and this complete stranger. A lot of stress. So all of these 2 factors make online dating, I wouldn't say unsuccessful, but challenging. All right, so that was my study. Then we moved on to this idea. That is, extra credit opportunities coming up, so you need to use your phone in like a little bit. So there's a question, right? Before you see the studies, they always have this implicit idea that whoever is dating online just wants to get married. How many people have friends over here who are dating online or using online dating apps with no intention of getting married, right? Oh, how are you using online dating? Oh, you have friends. Okay, good. All right. So do people who use online dating always use it to find marriage partners? Or could there be other reasons. Now, in the true spirit of IBM Think, let's think. So go to menti.com and enter the code 338826, and you'll see a question pop up, and I would really appreciate it if you answer that. Tell me if the question pops up or not. It's up? Okay. So the question looks like this. Oh, yeah. 338826. All right. Where is it? This is the one. I have to show you. Oh, Menti. Wait 1 second. 1 second. 338826. All right, so this is the question. 3 reasons why people might use online dating sites and apps. People have entered their answers. Three 8826. I hope you got that. This is the first time I'm using Menti in case you didn't. Yes. Ooh, okay then. We're getting to the nasty stuff. Alrighty. Look at that. Boredom. Sex is in the middle. Okay, boredom, bored. Lonely in new city. 338826 is the code that you had to use. Go to menti.com, 338826. All right. Love it. Need validation, don't we all? We good? All right, I think this is it. All right, so 3 reasons why people might choose online dating. So, of course, to hook up, because you're bored, you need some validation, you need a new friend, I feel you, whoever has written that. All right, on the hunt, relationships need yard work. Great, good for you. I mean, farmersonly.com, great site if you're doing that. Validation, friends, fear of what? Lonely, dates, hook up, to meet up, meet people, options, laziness. This is great. I love on the hunt. This guy is driven, or this person is driven. Now, if you look at the research that has been done, which has looked at people, why they're using online dating, you're all researchers, by the way. You really did not have to be a professor. You could do legit research on online dating, because this is exactly what they found. So they boiled it down, and they found out that there are 7 reasons why people use online dating. And we're going to look through them really quick. Alrighty. So researchers found similar results too. They found out that, people are using online dating for relationships. They're using to have sex. And not just random hookups, they're using it for increasing their sexual experience. So when they meet the person that they're intended to, they're caught up. Then you have peer pressure. Everybody is doing it, I'm gonna do it too. It's a status symbol. Then you have socialize. You wanna meet people, you wanna hang out, you wanna meet people who have the same interests as you do. Entertainment, distraction, validation, boredom, all goes under entertainment. That, you're not feeling cute, but you want that right swipe to validate yourself, girl, go. All right, then you have identity. That is, you want to role play. You're an IBM person in the morning, you're done being responsible till 5 p.m. At 6 p.m., you want to be an Upper West Side dog walker who has acai bowls. Do it, right? You can use online dating for that. And then you can use online dating for design. That is, okay, the algorithms that they're using, the preferences that they have, the kind of things that I can select, I'm about that life, I'm gonna use online dating for design. Now here's the situation though. A lot of research was done on the user side, like we talked about. This is where advertising comes into the picture. Now, we already know that advertising messages affect consumer behavior. We do that, right? I mean, you're actively putting out these ads to affect people, how they're gonna engage with a product or a service. And now we know that the behavior that people have, why are they using online websites? Now, this is where the main question came. That is, the reason why I'm using Bumble, the reason why you're using Tinder, Did we choose this life, or were we implicitly programmed by the advertising strategies to make these expectations happen? Do you know what I'm saying? Right? Like, you keep getting these messages. Bumble sends out these messages, Tinder sends out these messages, so these get ingrained in your head, and that's the reason why we're using online dating sites accordingly. So that became the main focus of the research study we want to talk about today, is do advertising messages used by online dating sites reflect the most common motivations of online daters? Like, if you look at the advertising strategies used by Tinder, Bumble, Meetup, etc., what have you, are they using these 7 motivations or not? And to what extent are they using it? So me and my friend, we were presenting this paper at a conference, and this idea came up, and we were like, listen, we're gonna do this huge coding of advertising strategies on all the websites in the United States. And then we're like, listen, why don't we just take it broad, right? Live magnum opus and do it like an international thing. So we did that. We did an empirical investigation. It's a mouthful of advertising strategies used by online dating sites. It's not one country. We did it across 51 countries and 3 continents. And we wanted to answer 3 questions. Number 1, are they using these advertising strategies correctly? That is, are they reflecting the motivations? If they are, is there a difference between the advertising strategies used in Europe, North America, and South America? And number 3, does it tie in with the cultural factors of each country? Now, do you think the cultural norms or values of the US differs from Spain? And if you're pitching to a Spanish audience, do you think you need to cater to their beliefs, right? For them to be digestible, for it to be digestible. So we wanted to see that. And bless her heart, this is my student, Carolina Zaluski. She was a student in my intro class, and she was like, I want to do comm research or advertising research. You see, she's the one who did a lot of this coding, and we presented this paper in International Communication Association in DC. And we coded a bunch of stuff. So we shortlisted 51 countries based on the social media penetration. After we did that, we used VPN masking to get localized results of these advertising websites that were mostly used in each country, and it turned out to be 1,003 websites. And then we coded the tagline and the attached text that comes when you go to the homepage of these websites. So, and based on the 7 motivations. I'll give you an example. So this is a hookup, not a hookup website, it's called gay.co.uk. And this, if you go to their homepage, you find this tagline. So we took the tagline, we took the 7 motivations, and we saw that how many of these motivations are hidden in this tagline. So let's read. The #1 gay hookup site in the UK, you will find a community of gay men looking to make friends, meet up, or simply exchange experiences for wilder and more adventurous sex life. UK people are legit, right? So what does Socialize look like? Socialize is the meetup part. Design is in the UK, it shows you geolocality. Entertainment is, exchange experiences, get some novelty going on. Then you have sex, of course, wilder and more adventurous sex life, and then peer pressure. The #1, whenever you say, oh my God, it's #1, what does it tell you? Anybody has gone to a restaurant after looking at the Yelp reviews? And it turned out to be bad anyway. So anyways, but we're not gonna go there. But what does Yelp reviews tell you? That is, you're looking for consensus. When everybody says it's #1, it's a status, like, oh, I wanna go there. So when they say #1, they're using this appeal. Another one who does not know Tinder, so a quick little overview. Meet new and interesting people nearby. This uses Socialize, meet new and interesting people, and design nearby. So we looked at the advertising appeals used by all these websites overall, and lo and behold, we see that our motivations are dictated by the appeals that they use, right? How many people have heard of this complaint that people have, like, online dating is great for meeting people? We've seen 2 websites, and both of them use that. That is, socializing is a big factor. The #1 was design. They all lead with design. That is, use our app because we have the best algorithm to link you up to your #1, right? So the most used advertising appeals are design, then you have peer socialize, then you have relationship, and followed by peer pressure. The least used is sex. It's so crazy, right? Like, for something that we think we are going to use it for, it's not in the advertising strategies. So a lot of the times when we use a product is what we make of it, right? Just like IBM. The users tell us what the brand is. You are dictating the fact that online dating is for sex. They are not telling you to do so. Now, what are the differences between across the pond and this side of the pond? North America uses a whole lot of peer pressure. People have heard of this thing called FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. A lot of people suffer from that in North America. That is, okay, I'm going to do it for peer pressure because everybody is doing it. I want to be a part of the conversation. A little different story in socialize. Europe uses no socializing. They don't care about meeting people, apparently. And then South America and North America use a whole bunch of socialize. This was very interesting. South America uses a lot of design. Why is that the case? Because online dating is up and coming in South America. Internet revolution is up and coming in South America. So they want to lead with proficiency. And the last one is, Europeans are getting a lot of entertainment appeals in there. I don't know, Vasala is like, true, see, alrighty. Europeans are more likely to get entertainment appeals compared to South America and North America. This is where shit gets really interesting, guys, and this is me pandering a lot to you. So to bear with me. Now, the last research questions, if you remember, was I wanted to see if the advertising appeals that were used by online dating sites, can we relate it back to the cultural factors, right? So over here, I asked Paige to send me the campaign of Put Smart to Work, which is used in the US, and it's used in China. If you do get a chance, watch those two ads. The two ads, the central campaign is Put Smart to Work. I just want you to look at the ads for the first 20 seconds and count the number of times the American ad uses the pronoun I and the Chinese ad uses the pronoun we. You can go back and look, and that'll tell you a lot about the cultural factors of a country. So IBM did a really good job in catering to the cultural factors of the country that you're promoting this idea to. So I wanted to see if they're doing the same in online dating ads or not. And the big daddy, the bomb diggity of cultural research is Geert Hofstede. So just to let you know who he is, this is the study that he launched in 1980. He wrote this paper. It's called Culture's Consequences, International Differences in Work-Related Values. And if you want to know how big of a guy he is, you need to know how many times his work has been cited. It has been cited a whopping 78,977. My work has been cited 39 times. So, but he's old, so I'm gonna get there probably. So his work is the bedrock of doing any cross-cultural research. So I was like, listen, I'm gonna use this model to predict what's going on in online dating sites. So I read up a little bit about him, and look what I found. Professor Geert Hofstede conducted one of the most comprehensive studies of how values in the workplace are influenced by culture. He analyzed a large database of employee value scores collected within IBM between 1967 to 1973. So give it up for yourselves. This research was in IBM. So if you have anybody in your family, if you're an IBM legacy, who has worked between 1967 to 1973, please thank them on my behalf to fill out that survey, because that has really helped my research out. Now, what are these cultural factors on which countries might differ? 6 things. The first one, everybody has heard of individualism, collectivism, is the most used one. Individualism is I, me, myself. Collectivism is everybody. Then you have power distance. What is power distance? Anybody has, like, what do you call it? Is it a janitor, probably somebody, right? Or somebody who cuts my hair. And a coder or a CEO. In America, doesn't matter what work you do, everybody kind of uses an iPhone. So there is no social disparity, no social inequality. In countries like India and China, there's a lot of social inequality. What is the social inequality? It's power distance. That is, we are born and raised with the idea that there is going to be stratifications in society, there is going to be a class, and we are okay with this social inequality. That's the way my mind works. So that's power distance. Uncertainty avoidance is how are you okay with not knowing? Then you have masculinity and femininity. The good way to understand is in the country that you reside, do you have gender specific roles? And is your mentality that, okay, a man should do this and a woman should do that? If you're that, you're a highly masculine country. If you're not, you're a highly feminine country. Sweden is a very feminine country. Long-term orientation is planning for the future. And lastly, you have indulgence and restraint. How much do you want to splurge? Are you hedonistic or not? So just to give you an example, continuing on the India and China example, the US and China example, power distance is huge in China, like I was saying. Not that much in the US. So I think Bethany was talking about how you are on international calls and sometimes people who are brand new will refrain from talking because they know that the managers are there. Probably they're from countries with high power distance where it's unacceptable to talk over a senior, right? Then you have individualism. United States is high on individualism. China is low. Then you have masculinity, pretty masculine countries, both of them. That's why you don't have female presidents, probably, deep dark. Then you have uncertainty avoidance. The US is pretty low on uncertainty avoidance. You're okay with not knowing. Then you have long-term orientation. Chinese people plan for the future. US live in the moment, very kumbaya. And then indulgence. Chinese culture is restraint. United States is, let's blow shit up, right? I mean, just let's go. It's Black Friday every day. Alrighty, so this is what research says. That is, if you have these kind of advertising appeals, you should be pushing it to countries with these cultural values. That is, if you have relationship and socialize, you should be pushing it to collectivist countries, right? Because it's not about I, me, and myself. Identity is I, me, and myself. So if you're leading your online dating ads with individualistic appeals, go to those countries. This was what the research says. This is what we found. That is, online dating advertisements which talk about relationship and socializing are being placed correctly, that you are in tandem, you're congruent with the cultural factors of the country. These things did not work out. I'm not going to bore you, just giving you a big overview of the online dating sites' advertising strategies is, I want to talk a little bit about this part. That is, in entertainment, low uncertainty avoidance countries, it's a good fit. Because if you're okay with not knowing, I mean, you want to go on an adventure, great, right? So those will be more receptive. What's interesting was this idea, that is socialize and high power distance. What does this mean in real time? People know about this thing called Bollywood. Yeah? How many people have heard of Bollywood? It's not Aladdin. Bollywood is an own thing. Alrighty. So in Bollywood, it's the Indian film industry, and one of the most overused scripts, it's like the High School Musical equivalent of Bollywood, is a girl is from a rich family, a guy is from a poor family, and they will not be able to be together. Because come on, the girl just drinks matcha tea all day, and the guy cannot provide, right? And that's the big plot, right? And then the movie goes on to show how everybody is opposed to this, and then they triumph and everything, what have you. That's the indicator of a high power distance country. So think about a country like India or China where there's a huge social disparity, and online dating ads are keeping on telling you that, hey, go out there, meet people. So the ad does not see, the online dating algorithm does not see how much money you make and tell you, okay, these are the people you want to meet. So it has a lot of equality effects, right? That is, hey, you know what? It's okay for me to reach out for this person who I would not be able to meet in real life, but hey, I can right swipe on her or him on Tinder, right? Or on Bumble, what have you. So using these advertising appeals for equality is a great disruptive technique that online dating ads are using. So this is what we saw. Last thing that we wanted to see, and this is, again, goes back to what I was just talking about, advertising either reflects culture or dictates culture, right? So it either tells you what the culture is already, or it will dictate the culture. It's bringing a change into what the culture should be. Because culture is nothing but the collective programming of the mind. Do you think the American culture has changed over the years? Do you think we've become a little bit more inclusive, right? Think about the things that you thought funny 10 years before, and now you cringe on them. What is that? Your collective consciousness is changing because of the media messages that we consume. So advertising has a huge role to play to not only reveal culture, but also to curate culture in a way. So if online dating strategies are using their advertising messages to bring in like a little bit of equality, then why not? Last thing, okay, people still with me? All right, last thing, people, all right. There's an extra credit opportunity coming in the end. Not really. The next step was we wanted to see what are the pictures that are being used, right? People have seen like they'll use a lot of pictures. Is there a relationship between the photographs used in advertisements, advertising appeals, continents, and cultural factors? So are you more likely to use certain type of pictures in particular countries compared to others? And can we relate it back to the appeals that were there? So if you're trying to appeal to, hey, get into a relationship. Here's a quick question actually. So if the big appeal is, hey, find your soulmate, which picture should you be using? Should you be using this picture? No, right? The one with the hair smelling, right? She just used Pantene. Alrighty. What is that? So pictures do affect the meaning of the messages, right? Sometimes have your friends put up really awesome pictures on Instagram and you don't really read the caption? What is that? Because pictures have a lot of meaning that overrides the meaning of the messages that you say textually. So we wanted to see what kind of pictures they were using, and we just went ham on coding every little thing about the picture. So we started with, okay, are they showing single people, couples, or groups? Are they showing sexual orientation? Are they showing same-sex couples or opposite-sex couples? Are they showing black, white, or other races? Are they showing mixed race, same race? Age, young, middle, old. Dress, what kind of dresses are the models wearing? It goes from demure, everyday dressing to nude. Then you have social distance. What is the distance from which I can view the model? Can I just view her head? Can I view her chest? Can I view her torso? Can I view the entire body? Then you have, how is the model looking at me? Is it looking away? Is it looking at me? Is it looking below me? Is it looking up? All of that. Contact between couples. Do you have zero contact between couples to provocative contact? And this is where the big idea of gender stereotyping came. That is, are models in online dating websites being portrayed in gender stereotypical ways? So there is a quick quiz for you. Relative size. So if you have a male and a female that you're showing in a photo, relative size is how much space or what is the height difference between the two. So if you have to stereotype a female, how would you show a female? Is she going to be taller or shorter? Shorter, right? Ritualization of subordination is body canting, like you've lost control of your body. You're lying down, your head is on somebody. Females are shown more like that, isn't it? Then you have feminine touch. Are you touching things or people in non-utilitarian ways? People use perfumes over here. Okay, perfumes have ads too. What do you see the perfume ads are like? This woman who's going to be so sexy and she's just holding the bottle on her cheek. That's feminine touch. Like, you don't need to do that, right? I mean, that's okay. But you do that. It's stereotyping. Then you have licensed withdrawal. It's like almost you're an exhibit at a museum and you're looking somewhere and people are just observing you. You have no gaze with the audience. And functional ranking is women are always showed in supporting roles. That is, if there is a doctor, the women are going to be nurses. So we wanted to see if all of this is happening in online dating sites or not. So two examples really, really quick. So this is from erodate.com. So you have a couple. You have opposite sex couples. It's a white couple. Then you have the woman is partially clad, the man is nude. It's close personal because they're also from the chest. Then you have young couples, and then offer ideal means you're not looking at the person who is looking at this picture. So all of this together conveys a message. Compare it to this one. It's a single female. It's an other race. We just did black, white, other. It's suggestive, the clothing, because it's tight on her. It's not demure. It's not highly suggestive. I mean, it's not provocative, but it's suggestive. Then you have far personal. You can see it from her, like it's underneath her chest. Then you have young, and then demand seduction is her body is canted this way, but she is looking like this. So it's a suggestive, it's a demanding, it's a seductive look. So we wanted to see how are these variations happening across continents and cultures. We haven't reached cultures yet. So the last two slides will show you, are females being gender stereotyped, and are young females being gender stereotyped differently than middle-aged females that are shown in online dating sites. So it turns out that North American websites are gender stereotyping females much more than European websites. And websites with peer pressure appeal stereotype women more. And the more you can see of the females, the more she's going to be stereotyped. So if you have a lot of her to see, she's going to wear less clothes, she's going to cant her head, etc., what have you. And women are not as stereotyped in websites with design appeals. And guess what? Males are also being stereotyped. So I don't know, it's a very twisted way of thinking about equality, but like before women are only being stereotyped, now women and men are being stereotyped. I don't know how to read that. So like, it's just like we're both bad now. And this was very interesting. So you see over here that young women are stereotyped more in greater social distance and lesser clothes, but in middle-aged women, it flips. That is, if you have middle-aged women, they are stereotyped less. So the more I can see, the more you're going to be covered up. So it just changed as you segregated through age. And of course, male stereotyping increases female stereotyping. Now, I've talked a lot. Now, just what's the point, right? I mean, this is the thing that my students are like, oh, you've told me all of this. What is the big point of this research? And we're really trying to get to three things. Number one is are online dating advertisements congruent with cultural factors? Especially IBM people will know that, right? Because you work in such a big organization, even if you're working on a singular mission, the way it translates into different cultures needs to be congruent. Because again, like we established, culture is the programming of the brain. Number two is, can the incongruence have positive or negative cultural consequences? So for example, we saw with the power distance. If you're using it for social equality, great, do it. And number three are online dating advertisements potentially feeding gender inequality in relationships by gender stereotype display of females. So if you go to a website and you see females dressed up like a certain way, a gender stereotyped way, and you get a female as your partner and you expect her to do the same. Oh, she's going to be shorter than me. She's going to cant over me. Is that leading to gender inequality or gender disparity in relationships? So that was the big overarching picture of my study. And hopefully I did a good job in telling you that, yo, you guys, I'm like really smart now. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time.